I paid my mother's rent for 4 years. I skipped vacations, turned down a promotion that would have required travel, and told myself that family comes first. I genuinely believed she was struggling alone. I genuinely believed she needed me. Then one Thursday afternoon, I stopped by her apartment without calling ahead, and a man I had never seen in my life answered her front door in a bathrobe. My mother did not look surprised to see him. She looked surprised to see me. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something real. If you found out that someone you had been quietly sacrificing for had been keeping an enormous secret from you, not to protect you, but to protect their own comfort, what would you do first? Would you walk away quietly, or would you finally say everything you had been holding back? Stay with me, because what Emily did next was not loud, and it was not cruel, but it was the most powerful thing she had ever done in her life. Emily was 31 years old when her father died, and she was 32 when she realized that the grief had quietly reorganized her entire life around her mother's survival. Her name was Emily Carlson. She worked as a senior coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus, Ohio, a job she was genuinely good at, a job that required her to be calm under pressure, organized in the middle of chaos, and always the person who made sure everyone else had what they needed. That description, she would later understand, was not just her job title. It was the role she had been rehearsing her whole life. Her mother's name was Diane. Diane Carlson was 58 years old at the time Emily's story begins in a real way, the way stories begin not with a single dramatic moment, but with a slow accumulation of choices that nobody questions until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. Diane was charming in the way that made people want to take care of her. She laughed easily, cried convincingly, and had a talent for describing her own hardship in a way that made the listener feel personally responsible for fixing it. Emily had grown up watching her mother do this with neighbors, with church friends, with her father when he was alive, and finally with Emily herself. She had watched it so many times that she no longer recognized it as a pattern. She just called it love. Emily's father, Robert, died of a heart attack in the spring. He was 61. He had been a quiet man, a steady man, the kind of father who showed up to every school event, who fixed things around the house without being asked, who never raised his voice and never needed to because his presence alone was enough to make a room feel safe. When he died, he left behind a modest life insurance policy, a paid-off truck, and a woman who had never once managed her own finances. Diane had never paid a bill. She did not know how the internet banking worked. She did not know what the utility accounts were called or whose name they were in. Robert had done all of it, quietly, for 34 years. Emily stepped in. Of course she did. She was the only child. There was no sibling to call, no aunt nearby, no uncle who could take over. There was just Emily, who drove 45 minutes each way to her mother's house every other weekend, who set up automatic payments on every account, who called the insurance company and navigated the claim process, who sat beside Diane at the kitchen table and explained what the monthly budget looked like and what could stay and what needed to go. Diane cried through most of those conversations. She held Emily's hand and said she did not know what she would do without her. Emily believed her completely. The first year was genuinely hard for Diane. Emily knew that. Grief is real, and losing a husband of 34 years is a wound that does not heal on a schedule. Emily gave her mother room to fall apart. She took on the extra tasks. She transferred money when her mother said the grocery budget was tight. She paid the electric bill twice when Diane forgot to apply the automatic payment change. She drove over to fix small problems that a functioning adult could have solved with a phone call. She did all of this without resentment because she told herself it was temporary. Her mother was healing. Her mother would find her footing. Her mother would become capable again. The second year arrived. Diane had not found her footing. If anything, she seemed to need more. She mentioned that the apartment lease was coming up and that the rent was going up by $200 a month and that she did not see how she could cover it. She said this in the particular soft voice she used when she needed Emily to offer something. Emily offered. She started transferring $300 a month to her mother's account. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself this was the kind of thing families did for each other. The third year arrived. The transfer amount had quietly grown to $500 a month because there had been a car repair, and then a dental bill, and then Diane mentioned that the building had started charging for parking, and she did not know how she was going to handle it. Emily covered it. She was also, during this same period, turning down a promotion at work because the new role would require occasional overnight travel, and she did not feel comfortable being unavailable if her mother needed something. Her manager was understanding, but also visibly disappointed. Emily told herself she had made the right choice. She was a good daughter. That was worth something. By the fourth year, Emily had given her mother close to $22,000 if she added it all up, which she tried not to do because the number made her chest feel tight. She had also given 4 years of weekends, 4 years of emotional availability, 4 years of being the person who answered every call, solved every small crisis, and never once said that she was tired. And she was tired. She was deeply tired in the way that does not go away with sleep. The kind of tired that lives in the part of you that has been saying yes for too long. The Thursday that changed everything began like any other. Emily had finished work early because a meeting had been canceled. She was already halfway to the highway when she decided, without much thought, to stop by her mother's apartment. She had picked up a bag of groceries, nothing dramatic, just a few things she had noticed were running low last time she visited. She did not call ahead because she almost never called ahead anymore. Her mother's place felt like an extension of her own responsibilities. She did not think of it as visiting, she thought of it as checking in. She parked in the small lot behind the building and took the back staircase because the elevator on that side was faster. She knocked. There was a pause that lasted a moment too long. Then the door opened. The man who answered was around 60, maybe 62. He had silver hair that was slightly disheveled, as if he had just woken up. He was wearing a navy terracloth bathrobe that Emily did not recognize and holding a mug of coffee that she very much recognized because it was from the set her father had bought at a market 20 years ago, a set Diane had kept because, as she told Emily, it was the last thing she could not bear to give away. Emily stood in the doorway with a grocery bag in each hand and did not say anything for a moment. The man looked at her with a polite smile that contained exactly zero surprise. He said hello in a friendly way. He called back over his shoulder. He said, "Diane, I think it's your daughter." Diane came around the corner from the kitchen wearing her good weekend blouse, the one she saved for occasions, with her hair done and her earrings in. Emily noticed all of this immediately, the way the brain catalogs impossible details in moments of shock. Her mother's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. The first was surprise, the genuine kind. The second was something that looked very much like calculation. The third was a warm smile that arrived too quickly to be real. Diane said, "Oh, sweetheart, I should have called you. This is my friend Gerald. Gerald, this is my daughter Emily." Gerald extended his hand and shook Emily's with the relaxed confidence of a man who had been in this apartment many times before. He said he had heard so much about her. He said Diane talked about her all the time. He said she must be so proud to have raised such a hardworking daughter. Emily shook his hand. She set the grocery bags down on the small entry table. She said it was nice to meet him. She said it in a voice she did not recognize as her own. She did not stay long. She made an excuse about needing to get back. She kissed her mother on the cheek. She drove home on the highway with the radio off and did not let herself think clearly about what had just happened until she was sitting in her own parking garage with the engine off, staring at the concrete wall in front of her, and the whole thing finally arrived. Gerald had not been in that apartment for the first time today. That was the first thing Emily understood with complete clarity. A man does not wear a bathrobe in someone's home and drink coffee from a dead husband's mug on a casual first visit. Gerald had been there before. Gerald had possibly been there many times. Gerald might have been there for a very long time. The second thing Emily understood was that her mother had not mentioned him. Not once. Not as a friend, not as a neighbor, not as someone from church or from the building, not even as a name in passing. In 4 years of twice-monthly phone calls and every other weekend visits, Diane had never once said the name Gerald, which meant Diane had been keeping him a secret. And the only reason a person keeps a secret is because they know how the truth would land. Emily sat in her C.R. for a long time. Then she went upstairs and made dinner and ate it at her kitchen table alone and told herself she needed more information before she decided how to feel. She was good at that, at putting feelings in a waiting room until she had enough facts to process them properly. It was one of the things that made her excellent at her job. It was also one of the things that had allowed her to absorb so much pain over the years without ever naming it as pain. She did not call her mother that night. She did not call her the next day either. She waited. She was good at waiting. Her mother called her on Saturday morning, 3 days after the visit. She called at the time she usually called, mid-morning, the way she always did when she wanted to address something on her own terms. She said, "I wanted to explain about Gerald." She said it in the careful voice she used when she was about to frame something in the most favorable possible light. Emily said, "Okay." Diane explained that Gerald was someone she had met at a community event about 2 years ago. She said they had become friends first, and then slowly, over time, it had grown into something more. She said she had not told Emily because she was afraid Emily would not understand, that Emily might think it was too soon, that Emily might judge her for moving on. She said she had wanted to protect Emily from unnecessary upset. She said it was not a big secret, really. She said it was just something private that she had kept private. Emily listened to all of this without interrupting. Then she said, "How long has Gerald been coming to the apartment?" Her mother paused in a way that answered the question before the words came out. Diane said, "Off and on, for about a year and a half, maybe closer to 2 years." Emily said, "So he has been coming to the apartment regularly for almost 2 years." Diane said yes. Emily said, "And has he been staying over?" Diane said, "Sometimes, yes." Emily said, "Does he contribute to the rent?" There was a longer pause this time. Diane said, "He helps out here and there, but his situation is complicated. He is in between some things." Emily said, "Does he eat groceries that I paid for?" Diane said, "Emily, I don't think that's fair." Emily said, "I'm not trying to be unfair. I'm trying to understand the situation." Diane said she did not see why it mattered. She said it was her home and her life, and she deserved some happiness after everything she had been through. Emily said she agreed completely. She said she hoped her mother was happy. She said she would call her later in the week. Then she ended the call and sat very quietly for a long time. The thing Emily kept returning to was not the relationship itself. She was not angry that her mother had found companionship. She understood loneliness. She understood grief and the way it eventually turns, not into forgetting, but into a hunger for warmth again. She did not blame her mother for wanting someone. What Emily could not quiet in her mind was the arithmetic of it. She had given $22,000. She had turned down a promotion. She had organized her life around availability. She had believed, genuinely believed, that her mother was struggling alone, that the financial pressure was real, that the sacrifice was necessary. And all of that time, for at least half of that time, there had been a man named Gerald. A man who drank coffee from her father's mug. A man who came and went freely, while Emily drove 45 minutes each way to bring groceries and check on a woman who was not, apparently, as alone or as fragile as she had seemed. Emily did not call her mother that week, or the following week. She was not punishing anyone. She was thinking. She was the kind of person who needed to understand something fully before she could respond to it, and she had a lot to understand. She started small. She went back through her bank records and created a simple document that laid out every transfer, every bill payment, every emergency contribution, and the dates they had happened. She was not a vengeful person by nature. She was an organized one. The document was just a fact. It sat in a folder on her desktop for several days before she looked at it again. Then she looked at it again. $22,340. Over 4 years and 2 months. An average of just over $440 per month, every single month, given to a woman who had, for at least the last 2 years, been sharing her home and her life and her expenses with a man who contributed here and there. Emily thought about the promotion she had not taken. She did the rough math on what that salary increase would have amounted to over 2 years. It was not a small number. She thought about the vacation she had not taken 3 summers ago because her mother had called the week before Emily was supposed to leave and said she had a bad feeling about being alone that week, and Emily had canceled the trip and lost the deposit. She thought about the dinner she had left early last New Year's because her mother had called at 9 in the evening saying she was not feeling well and could Emily please come. Emily had driven 45 minutes in the cold to find her mother watching television in bed with a mild headache, which resolved itself on its own before Emily even finished making the tea. She thought about all of it, not with bitterness, with a kind of slow, steady, widening clarity that was almost worse than bitterness because it did not come with heat. It came cold. Gerald's situation was complicated. He was in between some things. Emily wondered what that meant. She decided she was going to find out. This was not a vindictive impulse. Emily was not the kind of person who investigated people out of anger. She was the kind of person who investigated situations when she needed to understand them fully before deciding what to do next. There is a difference. The difference mattered to her. She found Gerald's last name by asking her mother one more time, casually, during a short call the following weekend. She said she had been thinking about what her mother had said and she wanted to understand better. She wanted to give Gerald a fair chance, and could she know a bit more about him, starting with his full name? Diane, hearing what she wanted to hear, which was that Emily was coming around, said his name happily. Gerald Marsh. He was a retired contractor. He had a grown son in Michigan. He had moved to the Columbus area a few years ago, after his own divorce. Emily said that sounded nice. She said she was glad her mother had someone. She meant part of that. She was also noting everything in a document she had open on her second monitor. Gerald Marsh was not difficult to find online. He had a sparse but traceable presence. She found records of a property in his name in a suburb about 20 minutes from her mother's apartment, a small house that, according to county property records, he had owned outright since before his divorce, which had been finalized a little over 4 years ago. He owned a house. He owned it free and clear. He was not, as his situation being complicated had implied, a man without resources. He was a man who had chosen to allow another woman to absorb his share of the living expenses while keeping his own property intact on the side. Emily sat with this information. She did not jump to conclusions. She considered other explanations. Maybe the house was being rented. Maybe there were legal complications with the title. Maybe she was misreading the situation. She made herself consider all of it fairly. Then she called a friend of hers, a woman named Rachel who worked in property law, and asked a few general questions, framed as hypothetical, about how property records typically worked. Rachel, without knowing the specifics, confirmed that an outright property ownership in Ohio was exactly what it sounded like and was straightforward to verify. Emily thanked her and moved on. She sat with all of this for another 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, she continued her regular calls with her mother. She did not transfer any money in that period, which she had not done since the day she found Gerald in the bathrobe, and her mother had not yet mentioned it. She noticed that too. The mention came on a Tuesday evening. Diane called, and after some warm opener conversation, said she wanted to mention that the water bill had come in higher than expected, and she was a little short this month. She said it in the voice. Emily recognized the voice immediately and felt something shift inside her chest, not anger, something quieter and more final. Emily said, "Mom, I've been thinking about our arrangement." Diane said, "What arrangement?" and her tone was already cautious. Emily said, "The financial support I've been providing. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I think I need to make some changes." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Emily, the water bill is only $80. Emily said she understood, but that this was not really about the water bill. She said she had done some thinking and some adding up, and she had realized that over the past 4 years she had contributed a significant amount of money to her mother's household, and she had done that believing her mother was managing alone. She said she now understood that, for at least the past 2 years, that had not been entirely accurate. Diane's voice changed. She said Emily was being unkind. She said Gerald was her companion, not her financial partner, and that Emily was confusing the two things. Emily said she was not confused. She said she was clear. She said she was not going to continue transferring money on a monthly basis going forward. She said she wanted her mother to know that now, so there was no confusion. Diane said, "I cannot believe you would do this to me." Emily said she was not doing anything to her. She said she was making a change to her own financial decisions, which was something she had every right to do. Diane said, "You know I depend on you." Emily said, "I know you have. I also now know some things about your situation that I didn't know before, and they've changed how I see things." The call ended with Diane in tears and Emily sitting very still at her kitchen table, feeling the way she always felt after holding a boundary, which was a strange combination of guilt and something she did not yet have a word for, something that felt like breathing. The guilt was familiar, the other feeling was new. Diane did not call for 9 days. Emily counted. For the first 6 days, she felt the absence like a bruise. For the last 3, she felt something approaching peace. Then her mother called, and this time the tone was different. The tears were gone. What was there instead was something harder. Diane said she had spoken to Gerald, and he had helped her think through things, and she felt Emily's behavior had been hurtful and dismissive, and that Emily owed her an apology for the way she had spoken to her. Emily said she had not spoken unkindly. She had spoken honestly. Diane said honesty delivered without warmth was just cruelty with better posture. Emily almost admired that line. She did not say so. She said, "Mom, I love you. I'm not angry at you for having Gerald in your life. I'm not angry at you for keeping it private, even though it hurt to find out the way I did. What I'm not willing to do is continue contributing financially to a household that I now understand is functioning differently than I was led to believe. That's all. That's the whole thing." Diane said Gerald was not wealthy. Emily said she had not claimed he was. Diane said this felt like punishment. Emily said it was a boundary, and those were different things, even when they felt similar from the outside. After that call, something changed in the broader family atmosphere. Emily had a cousin named Patris who was close to Diane, the kind of cousin who liked to manage everyone else's emotional business from a safe distance. Patris called Emily 2 days after the last conversation with Diane. She said she had heard from Aunt Diane and that she was worried. She said Diane seemed really hurt. She said she hoped Emily would reconsider. That family was family, and that whatever was going on could probably be worked through with a little grace. Emily listened to all of this politely. Then she said, "Patris, I appreciate you calling. I'm not going to discuss the specifics of my financial arrangements with my mother, but I want you to know I haven't ended my relationship with her. I've changed one aspect of how I provide support. That's a private decision, and I'm comfortable with it." Patris said it sounded like Emily was punishing Diane for finding love. Emily said it sounded like Patris had been given one side of the story and was working with incomplete information. She said it gently. She said it clearly. Patris was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for Patris, and then said she just hoped things would work out. Emily said she hoped so too. She meant it. The next person to contact Emily was someone she had not expected. It was Gerald. He sent her a message through a social media platform where they were not connected, which meant he had searched for her specifically, which meant he had put effort into finding a way to reach her. The message was long. It was friendly in tone, the way a message from someone who wants something from you is often friendly before the wanting becomes visible. He said he cared deeply about Diane. He said he understood there had been some upset and he wanted to be a bridge. He said he hoped they could all sit down together soon and that he looked forward to getting to know Emily properly. Emily read the message twice. She did not respond. She did, however, take a screenshot and save it in the folder on her desktop alongside her financial records. 2 more weeks passed. In that time, Diane called 3 times. The first call was an attempt at normalcy, surface-level conversation about nothing important. Emily participated. She was not cold. She was present, but she was also no longer the same version of herself that had been answering every call with unconditional surrender. The second call was another attempt to revisit the money conversation, framed this time as a temporary situation, just until things were more settled. Emily said the same thing she had said before, politely, clearly. The third call was her mother crying quietly and saying she felt like she was losing Emily, and Emily said, "You are not losing me, but you may be losing a version of me that wasn't serving either of us well, and I think that's actually okay." Diane hung up. Emily sat quietly. The guilt was still there, smaller now, but still there. The other feeling was getting bigger. She had started calling it clarity in her own mind because that was the truths. T-word she had for it. At work, something else was happening. Her manager, a woman named Sandra, had come to her again about the senior coordinator role, the one with the occasional travel requirement. Sandra said the position had not been filled yet and that she wanted to offer it to Emily one more time before going outside the department. She said she had always believed Emily was the right person for it and that she would be sorry to see someone else step into it. Emily thought about what she had sacrificed to stay available 4 years ago. She thought about how the sacrifice had been built on a version of her mother's life that was not entirely accurate. She thought about what it meant to make yourself smaller to protect someone who had not been entirely honest with you about whether they needed the protection. She told Sandra she wanted the job. Sandra looked genuinely pleased. She said she was glad. She said the travel was minimal, maybe one overnight per month, and that the team was strong and would support the transition well. Emily nodded and signed the paperwork that afternoon. She did not tell her mother about the promotion immediately. She processed it privately for a week, the way she processed most important things. She sat with the fact that she had earned it, that she had been ready for it for years, and that she was now allowing herself to step into it without making it contingent on someone else's approval or need. When she did tell Diane, it was during one of their regular calls, the ones she had continued despite everything, because she was not trying to end the relationship. She mentioned it simply. She said she had accepted a new position at work, a promotion she had been offered before and had turned down, and that she was excited about it. Diane said, "Oh, does that mean you'll be traveling?" Emily said, "Occasionally, yes, one night a month maybe." Diane said, "Well, I hope it doesn't make things too difficult for you." It was said in a specific tone, a tone Emily had heard many times, the tone that meant, "I hope this doesn't mean you'll be less available to me." Emily chose not to hear that version. She said she thought it would be good for her. The weeks that followed were quieter. Emily's life was not dramatically different from the outside. She still called her mother. She still visited occasionally, though less frequently than before. She no longer transferred money, and her mother had not asked again, which Emily found interesting. She wondered if Gerald had, in fact, helped with the water bill. She wondered if his situation had become somehow less complicated without an external source absorbing his share. She did not wonder with bitterness. She wondered with the detached curiosity of someone who had solved a puzzle and was simply noting how the pieces fit. The moment that shifted everything a second time came approximately 3 months after the bathrobe incident, as Emily had come to think of it in her own head. She received a call from her mother on a Saturday morning, which was not unusual, except that this call was different in a specific way. Diane's voice had a quality that Emily recognized from her childhood, from the moments when something was genuinely wrong and her mother was working up to saying it. There was a tremor in it that was real, not performed. Emily said, "Mom, what's going on?" Diane said, "I need to talk to you about something." She said Gerald had made a suggestion that she had been thinking about. She said that with rent being what it was and things being uncertain, Gerald had suggested that perhaps the practical solution would be for Diane to sell her apartment lease and move in with Gerald at his property, the one in the suburb 20 minutes away. Emily said, "Gerald has a property." Diane said, "Yes, a small house. You know, he mentioned he had some things to sort out." Emily thought about the county property record, the house owned outright since before the divorce. She said, "Is the house paid off?" Diane paused. She said, "I believe so, mostly." Emily said, "And is he asking you to contribute to the household if you move in?" Diane said Gerald had mentioned a contribution arrangement. Something fair, she said, something that reflected shared living. Emily said, "How much?" Diane said Gerald had suggested $800 a month, which she had said was more than she was paying in rent because of course there were other expenses in a house, and he would be the primary owner, and he wanted things to be fair. Emily did not say anything for a moment. She said, "Mom, has Gerald ever in the 2 years that you've been together paid for anything significant in your life?" Diane said that was not a kind question. Emily said it was an important one. Diane said he took her to dinner often and he was generous in many ways. Emily said, "But he's never contributed to your rent." Diane said, "It's complicated." Emily said, "What is complicated about it?" Diane was quiet, then she said, "He has D. Ebbs, Emily, everyone has complications." Emily said, "He owns a house outright. What debts are you aware of specifically?" Diane did not answer. Emily said, "Mom, I need you to hear me clearly right now, as someone who loves you. A man who has a paid-off house and has spent 2 years allowing you to manage your own rent, the rent I was helping cover, is now asking you to move into his house and pay him $800 a month. Does that sound like partnership to you?" The silence on the other end of the call was the longest one in their recent history. Diane said, "You've always been suspicious of people." Emily said, "I've always been observant. There's a difference." Diane said, "He makes me happy, Emily." Emily said, "I want you to be happy. I also want you to be protected. Those things can both be true at the same time." Diane said she needed to think. Emily said that sounded right. She said she loved her. She meant it. She spent the rest of that Saturday making a list of questions she thought her mother should ask Gerald before making any kind of financial arrangement with him. She wrote them out simply, cleanly, the way she wrote everything. She emailed them to her mother that evening with a short note that said, "These are just things worth understanding before any big decision. No pressure, no agenda, just love." She listed things like whether he would put any financial agreement in writing, what the specific shared expenses would be, what would happen to her contributions if the relationship ended, whether she would have any legal standing in the property, and whether she had spoken to anyone independent, not Gerald, not Emily, but an impartial person, before deciding. Diane did not respond to the email that day. She did not respond for 3 days. On the 4th day, she called and said, in a very quiet voice, that she had asked Gerald some of those questions. She said Gerald had not reacted well. She said he had said the questions felt like distrust, and that if Diane was going to approach their relationship like a business negotiation, then maybe they needed to have a bigger conversation. She said Gerald had gotten angry in a way she had not seen before, and that it had frightened her a little. Emily said, "I'm sorry that happened. Are you okay?" Diane said she was. She said she was sitting with some things. She said Emily's email had helped her see some things more clearly, even if it had been hard to read at first. Emily said, "I didn't write it to be right. I wrote it because I love you, and I've watched how easy it is to give someone the benefit of the doubt until you've given away too much." Diane was quiet, then she said, I know you have." The moment hung between them, and both of them understood what it held. It held 4 years. It held $22,000. It held a bathrobe and a coffee mug that belonged to a quiet man who had loved Diane steadily for 34 years. It held the promotion Emily had not taken and the deposit she had lost on a trip she had never been on. It held all of it. Diane did not move in with Gerald. She told him the following week that she needed more time and that she was not ready to make that kind of change. According to what she later told Emily, Gerald's response confirmed enough of Emily's concerns that Diane did not need the property records or the financial spreadsheet to understand what kind of man she was dealing with. He told her that she was making the wrong choice. He told her that women her age did not have unlimited chances at this kind of happiness. He told her that Emily was controlling her. He said several other things that Diane, to her credit, recognized as pressure dressed up as love. She ended things with Gerald the following Thursday. She called Emily to tell her. Her voice was tired and sad in the genuine way, not the performed way, and Emily felt her heart move toward her mother in the old uncomplicated direction, the direction of pure love that did not have conditions attached. Emily said, "I'm sorry, Mom, truly. I'm sorry he wasn't who you needed him to be." Diane said, "I think I knew for a while. I think I kept not looking." Emily said, "That's the easiest thing in the world to do." Diane said, "You looked." Emily said, "I had practice." Another silence, this one was softer. In the weeks after Gerald left the picture, Emily and her mother had several conversations that were different from any they had managed in the previous 4 years. They were honest in a way that was not comfortable, but was, Emily felt, necessary. Diane admitted that she had known, on some level, that letting Emily carry so much of the financial burden while Gerald was present was not right. She said she had told herself that it was temporary, that Gerald would sort out his situation, that she would pay Emily back when things settled. She said she had not been fully honest with herself about how long temporary had already lasted. Emily said she appreciated hearing that. She said she also needed her mother to understand that she had made choices, real choices, based on a picture of her mother's life that was not complete. She said those choices had cost her something real. She said she was not saying this to assign blame. She was saying it because it was true, and because their relationship going forward needed to be built on things that were true. Diane said, "What do you need from me?" Emily said she needed honesty going forward. She said she would still be in her mother's life, fully, but the financial arrangement they had had was over, not as punishment, but because it had been based on a misunderstanding of the facts that Emily could not unknow. She said she would help in other ways, and she would, because she was Emily and helping was written into her nature. But she would not be a source of monthly financial support while the actual situation in her mother's home remained unclear or hidden. Diane said, "That's fair." It took her a moment to say it, and Emily could hear the effort in the words, but she also heard that they were real. Diane said it again. She said, "That's fair, Emily, and I'm sorry." Emily had been waiting for those words for longer than she had known she was waiting. They did not undo anything. They did not return the $22,000 or the promotion she had turned down or the trip she had not taken. They did not give back the 4 years of weekends or the evenings she had driven 45 minutes in the dark because someone had a headache. But they mattered. They were a beginning of something real, which was more than Emily had had before. In the months that followed, Emily's life continued to reorganize itself around her own shape. The promotion was, as Sandra had promised, a good fit. She traveled once a month, one overnight, usually to Cincinnati or sometimes to a client in Pittsburgh, and she found that she liked the rhythm of it, the small contained independence of a single night in a hotel room with a good book and no calls to answer. She started saving seriously for the first time in years. She had a clear number in her head, a figure that represented something she was building toward, and she added to it methodically, the way she did everything. She and her mother spoke twice a week. They visited once a month, sometimes at Diane's apartment and sometimes at Emily's, and the visits were smaller and more honest than they had been. They were not always easy, but they were real. Diane was learning, in her way, to exist more independently. She had joined a group at the community center, a mixed bunch of women and men around her age who did a rotating book club and occasional day trips. She called Emily sometimes just to tell her about the book they had read, not to ask for anything, just to share. Emily liked those calls the best. Patris called once more, about 4 months after everything had settled, and said she had heard things had gotten better between Emily and Diane and that she was glad. Emily said she was glad too. Patris said she hoped there were no hard feelings about her earlier call, that she had just been worried. Emily said she understood. She said family looked like different things to different people, and that sometimes the most loving thing was the hardest thing, and that she had made peace with having done it. Patris seemed genuinely moved by this, which Emily had not expected, and the call ended warmer than it had begun. The folder on Emily's desktop, the one with the bank records and the property lookup and the screenshot of Gerald's message and the list of questions she had sent her mother, sat unopened for a long time. She did not delete it. She did not need to look at it again. But she kept it because it represented something she did not want to forget, not the anger, which had mostly passed, but the clarity. The fact that she had looked at her own life squarely, added up the numbers, asked the questions, and chosen not to keep arranging herself around someone else's silence. One evening in early spring, about 8 months after the bathrobe incident, Emily sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop and opened a new savings document. She titled it simply and without drama. It was a budget for a trip she had always wanted to take, a week in Portugal that she had seen in a travel magazine years ago and had bookmarked on her phone and never done anything about. She started putting in numbers. Flights, accommodation, a reasonable daily budget, a small buffer. She looked at her savings account. She looked at the travel document. She did the math. She could go, not immediately, but by autumn. She could go by autumn if she kept her current savings rate and did not find a reason to deprioritize herself before then. She did not find a reason. She kept her savings rate. She did not give herself permission to sacrifice the trip the way she had sacrificed the last one. She booked the flights in June. She told her Mo. They're about Portugal that same weekend, during their regular call. She said she was going in October for a week. She said she was excited. Diane said, "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Send me pictures." Emily said she would. She went. She took the pictures. She sent them to her mother and to Rachel and to Sandra and to a couple of other people she had let closer into her life over the past year, people she had not had room for when her room was full of someone else's needs. She stood on a tile terrace above a blue harbor one morning with coffee in both hands, not her father's mug, her own mug, a cheap ceramic one from the market in Lisbon, and she felt something she had been trying to name for a long time. It was not happiness exactly, though it was that too. It was more specific. It was the feeling of being inside her own life. Not inside someone else's need, not standing at someone else's door, not doing the math on whether someone else had enough. Inside her own life, her own morning, her own harbor, her own coffee, her own sense of what this day was for. She had earned this, not by making anyone suffer, not by winning an argument or exposing a lie or getting money back or making sure everyone knew what she had endured. She had earned it by finally asking herself the question she had spent 4 years not asking, which was, what am I building for, and is the person I'm building it around being honest with me about why they need me here? The answer had been no, and she had let herself know it. And then she had done the quieter, harder, more lasting kind of work, which was choosing to keep loving the people who had hurt her, but from a place of clarity instead of confusion, and to keep building something of her own at the same time. Emily sent one more picture that morning. It was just the harbor, the blue of it, the light on the water. She sent it without a caption. Her mother replied with 3 words. It said, "I see you." Emily read it twice. She put her phone face down on the terrace railing. She picked up her coffee. She stayed on the terrace for a long time, watching the light change on the water, not waiting for anything, not needed anywhere, not organizing anything for anyone else. Just there, just Emily, just finally, clearly, entirely herself. Before you go, I want to leave you with one real question from Emily's story. Emily never made a scene. She never sent an angry message. She never went looking for revenge in the loud sense of the word. She just stopped arranging her life around a version of someone else that was not entirely honest. And that quiet shift changed everything. So I want to ask you this. Is there someone in your life right now whose version of the story you have never questioned, because questioning it felt like betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Emily's story is for every person who has ever been the dependable one for too long. You are not alone in that.